Alright, I hope y'all can hear me. What up? It's been too fucking long. No, nobody's here, but it's all good. Gonna get this thing cracking anyway. Let's see here. So, I'm gonna tell you guys what's been grinding my gears. Hi, by the way. I know it's been so fucking long since I've streamed. I've been going through so much, so much bullshit, so much crap. Excuse my French, but finally got back to you guys. So, but what's been grinding my gears are these goddamn, I guess you would call them imperialist. These psychopaths. That's the way I look at them. These guys calling for war. And right now, well, about a year ago, there's this channel called Atlantic Council, and they dropped this video called Sanctions Busting in the DRC, where they try to justify all this goddamn sanctioning of the Democratic Republic of Congo and financial sanctioning, to be precise. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that right now. Let me start it over so you guys can see this, and we'll watch it together, and we'll find out if there's any merit to these sanctions, and if it's gonna if it's gonna help anybody. Yeah. What up, Panda? And yeah, I'm gonna try to play some chess too. And I'm glad to see you've been doing well. Let's see. Grateful. Some firewood and take care of your chickens. Right on, man. Take care of those little chickens so they grow up to be big old fat giant dinner, so we can eat them, basically. I was gonna offend some vegan out there. I don't care right now. One day it'd be nice to grow chickens, though, ethically. Let me see. Shogi. Yeah, I gotta learn shogi. I just been too hooked on just plain old normal, I don't know what you call this, European chess. So let me see. Go ahead and play this fucking video. Sorry guys, I'm still getting the hang of this. This laptop. I'm gonna go ahead and play it while I mute. Make sure you guys can hear it, because I think yeah, there we go.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Bronwyn Bruton, and I'm the Director of Programs and Studies here at the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council. Welcome. I am pleased and honored to be joining the Sentry today in launching its new investigative report, Overt Affairs: How North Korean Businessmen Busted Sanctions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is an important and timely study with implications for global security and non-proliferation efforts.
Yeah, and really quick, Panda said historically there are economic food crashes and shortages, and the only thing that gets countries out of it is war. That's an interesting way to look at it, but I mean, historically that might be true, but presently there's plenty of food to go around. There's plenty of safety and harmony to go around. It's just not being distributed properly, and people don't have access to it because there are forces going out of their way to make sure that that doesn't happen. When you put sanctions around countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, Honduras, whatever, these countries that you have problems with for whatever reason, you maybe want their oil and resources, maybe you just want to put a puppet in there. What you do is you starve the people, you turn them against their leaders, you make sure there are food shortages, even though it's all completely artificial. And eventually, the hope is that you, you get what happened in Cuba. A lot of Cubans fled their country, right? Thanks to all the shenanigans America was pulling in Cuba. And when socialism came about, it was usually like the upper echelons of the Cuban society that came to like Florida and that area about. And they hate communism, they hate socialism, they hate all that shit because they were doing good in the capital system that these countries had before. But the people who stayed, they more or less benefited from the revolution. Now there were problems, and a lot of that was brought about by intervention by the CIA and whatnot. But it's a really old scam. These sanctions and getting these countries to turn against their leaders. It's like they want you to think it's all natural. Like, oh, that's just the human condition. We're just naturally violent. There can never be peace. And I used to think that too back in the day. But if you know anything about history, you realize that America hasn't been we haven't not been meddling in other countries' affairs for like since our inception. It's in our blood. Since like the 1800s, we've been causing coups and getting in other countries' affairs because that was how we made money. That was that was our claim to fame. Renting out our guns and arms. We still do it today. We don't really export much as a country, but we export a lot of bombs. That's why it's in our best interest to manufacture all these crises so people stay in a state of crisis, and we can send our heroes, our soldiers, whatever you want to call them, Marines, Army. We send them around, and these people it's a scam, it's a grift. We create these problems and we send our guys to fix it. It's bullshit. But yeah, I'll read what you've been saying. Yeah, it's a circle, and the United States, they've been playing that game for a long time. But let me resume the video. Excuse me.
We will have an hour to discuss the study. In a moment, I will be handing over to Hillary Mossberg, who is Director of Illicit Finance Policy at the Century, to say a word of introduction on the Century and its work. Following her remarks, John Deloso will provide what he says will be a less than 10-minute overview of the report. Following John's introductions, we'll have a discussion with a really remarkable panel of experts. Darya Dalzaloskova, a North Korea expert, is a research analyst in the Proliferation and Nuclear Policy Program at Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies. Dr. Pierre Engelbert, an expert on the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is a senior fellow here at the Africa Center, and also the H. Russell Smith Professor of International Relations at Pomona College. And finally, Floribert Anzalone is an expert on the Congolese banking system, and also co-founder and coordinator of the Filimbi Citizens Movement. As you can see, we have an extraordinary amount of expertise assembled here. And in addition to our speakers, I want to point out that we've had more than 300 RSVPs for this event. Many of you are, of course, also national security experts and wonderful speakers in your own right. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I just want to point out that everyone on this panel, except for like they have one Congolese banker, and good on them for bringing him, right, to give his point of view, however subjective that may be. But everyone else on this panel is like a Westerner and a foreigner, and largely European, to be frank. And it just, there's a lot of audacity, I think, in America, where you have this attitude that we know better than these other countries. Like, we get to decide how they run their finances and their politics and all that, and we think we know what's best for them. And really, it's just very pretentious and super disrespectful. Um, and also, there's probably an element of racism in there as well. I don't want to get too social justicey on it. It's just, I think it's exemplified pretty well in this video.
So I would encourage you please to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions and comments. We're going to be monitoring those inputs very, very closely throughout the conversation, and they'll help us to ensure that we're giving you the information that you would like to get out of this event.
Yeah, I see Cosmic Warriors Panda. Thanks for stopping by.
It's my pleasure to introduce Hillary Mossberg of the Sentry. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you, Bronwyn. My name is Hillary Mossberg. I'm the Director of Policy at the Sentry. The Sentry is an investigative and policy team that follows illicit finance networks connected to war criminals and war profiteers, and we seek to shut those benefiting from violence out of the international financial system. We were co-founded in 2016 by George Clooney and John Pendergast, and we are an initiative of the Clooney Foundation for Justice. Since we launched, we've focused our efforts to create significant financial consequences for illicit actors, and we're currently focused on the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. We publish investigative reports, like the one you're going to hear about today, uncovering corruption, human rights abuses, illicit finance, sanctions violations, and our policy arm works closely with policymakers, law enforcement, global banks, and the private sector entities around the world. Our work has led to asset freezes, travel bans, increased anti-money laundering efforts by governments and banks, and the exposure of vast corruption networks around the world. The report we're discussing today, while it's focused on North Korean actors, exemplifies the type of change we're hoping to see in the DRC, which includes increased attention to illicit actors abusing the country's financial system, stricter enforcement of existing laws and regulations, and the need for technical assistance so that the DRC's banks and public institutions are better able to prevent, detect, and punish illicit financial activity. I will now turn it over to John Deloso, the Sentry Senior Investigator, for an overview of the report. Thanks.
Thank you.
So just how they cloak this in under the veil of anti-money laundering efforts. You know, it's bullshit. I don't buy any of that shit. It's like they give a fuck about money laundering in the Congo. I don't give a shit if they're doing it in American dollars, Chinese dollars, your mama's dollars. That's them running an independent business. That's capitalism. What's the fucking problem? Money laundering in the Congo. Like we give a fuck about the corruption in the Congo. Can't even handle our own corruption, but we're gonna sanction them because of corruption in the Congo. Get the fuck out of here.
The findings in this relatively short report are relevant for policymakers, researchers, bankers, and the broader public. And while the report most specifically pertains to North Korea and the DRC, the implications and insights will be more widely instructive on sanctions evasion, sanctions enforcement, due diligence by banks, and overall financial inclusion. So with that said, I'm going to briefly review the report and then hopefully turn it over as quickly as possible to this esteemed panel so we can start discussing the report and putting it into context. So for those of you who have not read the report, there are two primary factual takeaways from this report, though there are clearly much broader ramifications, as I said. First, North Korean businessmen set up a company in the DRC, opened a bank account, and won public contracts. Stemming from that, these commercial activities constitute apparent violations of EU, UN, and US sanctions. So let's go into that first point a little bit more. What happened? So two businessmen came to the DRC in 2018 on North Korean passports and using tourist visas. And you should see the travel documents they used up on your screen now. So these two individuals, Mr. Wang Kil-soo and Pak Hwa-song, once they entered the country, quickly set up a business by the name of Congo Akonde. And you'll see some of the incorporation documents on your screen now clearly identify these individuals as having been born in Pyongyang, even if the specific description of their nationality is somewhat ambiguous. And then, very importantly, as part of the company formation process, these individuals opened up a US dollar bank account with little apparent resistance at the DRC affiliate of a bank called Afriland First Bank. And notably, within no more than 3 months of setting up the company, Congo Akonde, these individuals won contracts from the provincial government in a very isolated area of the country to build 2 statues. And mind you, for those of you who are North Korea experts, this was in 2018. Then, after this, what I would call fairly rapid feat of business development, the company showed up later on the other side of the country. Now the statues were built in the southeast, and now we're in the northwest in Kinshasa. And we saw one of the shareholders in the company, a North Korean national, appear at a public event speaking with the governor of the province that encompasses Kinshasa, and who also happens to be a senior member of the former president's political party. So there are some sanctions implications here, as I noted. EU, UN, and US sanctions largely forbid the provision of banking services to North Koreans. And in this case, we see that the North Koreans were able to obtain such services. Notably, US sanctions strictly prohibit provision of US dollar accounts to North Koreans. And again, in this case, we see that the North Koreans were able to obtain such accounts. Finally, EU and UN sanctions expressly prohibit the procurement of North Korean origin statues, as well as prohibiting member state entities, UN member state.
Ooh, you hear that, guys? It's against the sanctions provisions for the North Koreans to open a bank in Africa and exchange in US dollars. Oh me, oh my, the North Koreans, they're gonna take over the world by building one fucking statue in Africa at a time. It's one statue today, could be a whole mausoleum by October. Holy shit. We gotta stop them now. I mean, do you hear these lunatics over here fear-mongering about North Koreans building a fucking statue in Africa like it's the end of the world? These sick, degenerate fucks want to sanction the DRC because of a fucking statue. Are they sick? I mean, that's obvious, but like what is wrong with them? Like, honestly, what is that diagnosis? Is it just sociopathy? Is it just an intellectual sluggishness? Is it just sloth and laziness? Do they not give a shit about finding out the actual facts about what's going on and what sanctions actually do to people? And how they never help and they never work? Name one time that sanctions have worked and they've turned around a country. I think BDS worked once in South Africa because everybody was on board, but
entities from procuring statues from North Koreans. So in this case, we have North Koreans building statues, which they are not allowed to do according to current EU and UN sanctions regimes. And then we have provincial authorities in this far-flung province by the name of Olomami using public funds to pay for those statues. So this is what you could call a apparent bidirectional violation of those sanctions programs, both by the North Koreans and the people who had dealings with them. So I want to end on why this matters, because some of you have expertise in North Korea and not the DRC, and vice versa. So I just want to spell this out. Sanctions on North Korea aim to disrupt, in large part, overseas revenue generating activities and access to banking services, which is precisely what we see happen here. These individuals engaged in both of those activities and obtained access to those services. And that is, these sanctions exist because they're targeting revenue generated overseas, because that revenue may support the primary target of sanctions on North Korea, and that would be their weapons programs.
Their weapons programs. Like, I'm supposed to be afraid of North Korea's weapons programs when we outspend the next 11 countries combined? Are you serious? I'm supposed to be shitting my pants because North Korea managed to hobble together a few fucking nukes? Get the fuck out of here. And now that gives you the right to make sure that their country doesn't prosper or have anything. Deranged. It's like just beyond deranged.
And beyond specifically the threats touching on North Korea, there are systemic vulnerabilities in the DRC.
Yeah, it's systemic, all right. You got that right.
That really gave rise to this scenario that we're discussing today. And far from just being damaging to the reputations of those institutions or revealing of certain institutional frailties, this puts the entire Congolese economy in danger. As you'll hear on this panel, the economy of the Democratic Republic of Congo is heavily dollarized. And as a result, banks in the DRC rely on international banks to process transactions in foreign currencies, but with particular importance on the US dollar. So these kinds of activities obviously make international banks take pause. And in fact, this would not be the first time international banks have come face to face with sanctions evasion issues or other matters pertaining to illicit finance in the DRC. So this seemingly peripheral and arcane history we've written about with small, not particularly appealing statues in a far-flung province is actually quite important from the perspective of international peace and security, as Bronwyn said, and also the economic well-being of the Congolese public, which should be a major preoccupation of ours in this matter. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Hillary, I believe.
All right, I'm going to jump in. Again, my name is Bronwyn Bruton, the Director of Programs and Studies at the Africa Center. I have the honor of moderating this panel. Thank you so much for those remarks, John. You were true to your word. You gave it to us in a nutshell. I'm going to turn to Daria Dolzakova first. Daria, I am not an expert in proliferation financing, so I have to tell you, I'm a little confused about why we have so many people assembled here expressing concern about these statues in the Congo. Can you explain to a non-expert like me how we know for sure that these aren't sort of two guys from a difficult country just trying to make a living somewhere?
Yeah, even she's having a hard time swallowing this load of bullshit. Oh, so they sponsored a goddamn statue in Africa, and now that means that North Korea is going to destroy us all? I don't know. It doesn't really follow. Get the hell out of here, man. It's goddamn ridiculous.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. The most simple answer to that is so when we talk about proliferation financing, just to sort of give a 101 to folks who might not be familiar with what we're talking about when we talk about proliferation finance or PF, a lot of times, kind of when you say PF, people think exchange of funds for weapons of mass destruction. And that's part of it. That is a very, very small part of what PF actually looks like. A large part of PF that we see actually looks at these kind of revenue generating activities by proliferators, or the establishment and use of these kind of financial and corporate networks that were highlighted, some of them in this case study, to move the funds that are generated back to these proliferating countries and potentially to contribute to their WMD programs. Now, how we draw that link from North Korea's WMD program to the construction of these two statues, that's sort of where the challenge lies. And that's a challenge that a lot of people looking at proliferation financing, at North Korean sanctions evasion actually face. Because a lot of times we can't make that connection. In some instances, North Korean construction activity in Africa that has been linked to particular.
Okay, guys, so right there, she just admitted that they can't really prove a link between these statues and North Korea's weapons program. So right there, she just admitted that this whole thing was just a wild goose chase brought about by nothing but some whimsical hatred of North Koreans building a statue in Africa. This is beyond insane. Am I the last sane fucking person on this planet? What is this shit that's going on, man? Like, who cares? Leave North Koreans alone. You already fucked up their country during the Korean War. And then tried to act like you didn't do anything, America. Like nothing happened. Oh yeah, we just have two Koreas now. What? No big deal. That's life. Some people get sanctioned. What? Some people starve. Not our fault. We didn't have anything to do with that. No, our hands are fucking clean. We're squeaky clean America. Everybody give it up for squeaky clean America. We just help people. We just sanction the fuck out of them. We didn't rip North Korea in fucking two. That's Kim Jong-il's fault for being a communist. Oh, communism just brings starvation and famine. There was nothing we could have done. Oh, we're just America. We just tried to help. We just tried to be the heroes. Get the fuck out of here. You fucking deranged psychopaths. Or best case scenario, you're intellectual losers who don't know your fucking history. Just drinking this goddamn Kool-Aid that you're just so superior to everyone.
Companies. So I'm thinking of Malaysia Korea Partners, for instance, or MOP, the Mansudae Group. There have been links made directly to the North Korean government. So whenever we see links to those companies, it's a pretty safe bet that they're operating on behest of the North Korean government. In instances like this one, where there's not as clear of a connection to one of these entities, it does become a little bit trickier to make that connection. However, looking at these two individuals and knowing the way that the North Korean economy works and how closely North Korean activities abroad are monitored by the government, and the fact that these are they're small statues, but they're relatively substantial sort of investments or projects for a country like North Korea that is under quite significant sanctions. So we're not talking about the smuggling of a couple of packs of cigarettes. These are construction projects that will generate some revenue. So the chances of these two guys just kind of going off on their own.
Oh yeah, no. These weren't just any statues, guys. These were substantial statues. I mean, these statues have some real economic potential for North Korea. I mean, god damn, yeah. Oh yeah, all the pieces are falling into place now. I can see the whole scheme. Yeah, Kim Jong-un's just gonna build a fucking army of statues, right? And then he's gonna get his wizard friends to enchant them with a spell until they're all little fighting golems. And then he's gonna fight America with his army of golems and just take us all down. And we'll be like, oh no, Kim Jong-un, we knew we should have let you build those statues in Africa. We didn't stop you when we had the chance, and now we're paying for it. No, don't crush us golems, no. Psh. And the North Korean African golem statues will crush us and laugh. The North Korean African golem laughs. And America will end, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Oh yeah. Is that the story you guys are writing in your heads, CIA? Because it takes a hell of a lot of imagination to link a statue to weapons program. I mean... And even, let me give the benefit of the doubt. Even if that was what was going on, I already told you the history, what America's been doing in North Korea. So even if they were just selling the statues so they could buy all the chemical weapons in the world and just give it to children, their country's so fucked up and we're so culpable When I say we, I mean like our government and the people who were running it at that time. Not that the people who've inherited have done much with it, but the people who were running it at that time. I mean, they're so culpable. It's absurd. And we just sit here like, well, that's a North Korean problem. We can't help them, but we can punish them. That's for damn sure. We can sanction them. Jesus freaking Christ.
I would say are very slim.
Great, thank you for that, Daria. Appreciate it. John, let me jump to you for just half a second. Do you have any sense of the dollar amounts involved in this transaction?
I would say we don't. That was obviously something we tried to establish through our investigation, but in the end, we were not able to establish that. If I could jump back to one quick point to reinforce what Daria said. For those of you who've read the endnotes of the report, you will have most likely seen that one of the
I mean, this is really sick. 2 points. For one, this bitch isn't cool enough to have the name Daria. Daria Morgendorfer from the show Daria, which we all cherished. She would have never been a warmonger or an imperialist or a fucking puppet of CIA talking points or a parrot of propaganda like this Daria. All right, so it's just a shame she's shit all over that name. And also this idiot just admitted that he doesn't even know the exact dollar amount that we're dealing with here. So they just jumped on this fucking story. Like as soon as they heard that North Koreans were building statues, they just jumped on it. Like, oh, they're up to something. Let's get them. Let's talk about it. Let's stop them. What the fuck, dude? Like you guys are like the biggest Karens I've ever seen. Like instead of just being on your phone calling the police on some black dude, you're way worse. You're willing to go to the army and narc on a bunch of North Koreans because they built a statue in Africa. You guys are like beyond the squarest, lamest Karens on the planet. And I hate using that because my good friend Karen M is a Karen, and she's not a technical Karen. She's actually a very sweet lady and very cool, super cool. So Karen, if you're watching, I love you.
initial endnotes references the passports and the type of passports these individuals were carrying. We had a bit of a mixed bag, I would say, of input from North Korea experts, and people had some knowledge of North Korean travel documents. But there's reason to suspect that a PO passport, which is the type these two individuals were carrying, is in fact an official passport, which the UN panel of experts in the DPRK indicates are given to professional athletes going overseas and state-owned company employees who have been sent on an official mission abroad. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. That is also a helpful clarification. I appreciate that. Pierre Engelbert, so you know DRC inside and out. You've traveled through the country for years and years and years and years. You've actually seen these statues, unbeknownst to you, that they were North Korean financing efforts. What is your take on this situation? I mean, what's your reaction to the fact that these were apparently connected to the North Korean regime? And do you think that this is an example of Congolese corruption, or are we more likely looking at a situation of incompetence on the Congolese side?
Thank you, Bronwyn. Yeah, those are good questions. Let me clarify. I was in 2018 in Camina for my own research. I had nothing to do with this. And I did see at the time the first statue. The statue, the report doesn't fully clarify it, but the first statue is a statue of the founder of the Luba Empire. It's Ilunga Mbidikilue. And so he's the mythical person, a hunter who's at the origin of the Luba. The Luba is the largest ethnic group in Congo, although they're only 8% of the country. They're the largest single ethnic group, and they're a complete majority in that province. Now they had that statue there, and we saw it. I didn't know the North Koreans were building it, but there was an issue. They were waiting. It was before the presidential elections, and they were waiting for the candidate of the regime, Emmanuel Shadari, to come and visit and campaign. But apparently he wasn't coming, and this is the story that the locals told me, because they were expecting a statue of Kabila and not a statue of the founding father of the empire. And so then that might explain, when I was there, the second statue wasn't there. And so apparently they also ordered a second statue of the father, not the current Kabila president, but the previous one, who he's a Luba himself, although not from that province, but he's part of that group. This was the only public investment I was able to observe there. So this is a very poor province, one of the poorest in the country, one of the few that doesn't have significant mineral resources. And that's one of the things we asked the governor, and we met with the governors, like, given the scarcity of resources, is it really meaningful to use the little money you have to build statues of the founding father and the president? Now, I'll tell you what, to some extent, it was meaningful politically. And so this kind of goes with your question of competence and corruption. There's no lack of individual competence in Congo. The public administrators or the bankers are highly educated and competent people. But it's a very corrupt institutional environment. And it's an institutional environment where you need to secure patronage. You cannot function unless you have some sort of godfather, some patron looking after you. And that is true for provincial governors. So you have the governor of that region, which has virtually no local resource. Unlike Okatanga, for example, where they can tax mining, here there really is nothing. And so they're very dependent on Kinshasa to transfer resources. I know the Constitution obligates the central government to transfer 40% of national revenue to province. They don't in reality. It's more like 5%. So you need to go and lobby, and you need to do things that please the government. And that could be giving ministers or important people access to contracts, to resources. Or if you can, a province like Olomami that really has so little, it might be building a statue and making them happy and showing your allegiance that way, right? So to some extent, I can see how that might have been a rational decision for the governor. And then the statue of the founding father of the empire might have been due to the fact that there was significant division among the provincial population, all of whom are Lubakat, but they come from different, let's say, clan to simplify. And right before this gentleman became the governor, the previous governor had been destituted because he was believed by some members of the provincial assembly of not representing a significant, important branch of the lineage. And so I think there was an attempt here to bring the Lubakat together. Now I can tell you that for people who deal with this kind of political constraint, following UN sanction is really a mild priority. They might be aware of it, but frankly, that ranks very low on the totem pole of political obligation. And political survival and financial survival come first in Congo for them.
Yeah, I imagine they must be very surprised indeed, the people of Kamina, to know that we're all here talking about those statues today. So let me pick up on one point that you made, Pierre, and take that back to John. Pierre mentioned that this is something that was likely to need involvement by Kinshasa, and you mentioned in your report that some of these businessmen actually had been seen with associates of then President Kabila. Is that correct?
That is correct. The three senior political figures in the elected officials in the country with whom the North Koreans had some level of interaction, or the politicians who were apparently aware of the projects that they were undertaking. All three of them fall under the grouping, the electoral bloc that is headed by former President Joseph Kabila, the FCC, or Common Front for Congo. And then two of those individuals are quite senior in Kabila's political party itself, which is the PPRD. So while Emmanuel Shadari, the political candidate that Pierre mentioned, we don't have any evidence that he came in direct contact with these North Koreans, shook their hands, knew that this specific company was building the statues. But as we know in the report, he did say that he visited this site of these statues because it constituted a promise of the head of state to the people of the region. So we took that to...
Wow, did you hear that, guys? So because like the president like visited these statues, that's how they know that there's some big old conspiracy to like funnel money to North Korea to fund weapons of mass destruction. Are you guys hearing this shit? This thread of like insane conspiracy theory and just like crazy plot that only the CIA could fucking concoct. Like it's all just fiction, man. And these guys buy their own bullshit. It's insane.
To be at the minimum an indicator that this was a project of some import. Then
Okay.
later,
Oh yeah, sure.
we
Yeah, guy.
identify the fact that
Weird.
one of the North Korean officials, or pardon me, North Korean shareholders came in direct contact with the governor of Kinshasa province by the name Jean Ngobila, and was having a conversation with him and was apparently pitching some sort of public park project with a fairly large price tag from what we've been able to determine, though not conclusively. So the question for me becomes, how do these individuals who've just recently entered in the country establish business in such short order, and then on top of that establish business in these far-flung places in the case of Kamina, but projects that gain the attention of people who are at the highest rungs of authority in the country?
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. Floribert Anzaluni, let me turn to you because you're an expert in the Congolese banking system. You've been employed by the major banking conglomerates in Africa, so you are a senior official yourself. Tell me what went wrong here? What is the state of the Congolese banking system, if you could characterize it broadly, and then specifically, what failed in order for this to happen? Is this a big mistake? Is this an easy mistake? Try to give us some sense of how big of an oops this was.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that as a former banker and a civil society activist, I'm clearly not surprised by the content of the report. As Mr. Engelbert just said, it's clearly a systemic problem. It's not only this one, it's the consequence of a systemic problem that the country is facing, which include bad governance and, of course, corruption. So, as briefly indicated by John, I think, Congolese environment is quite particular because the value of our currency is too low, and that it's weak. And most of transactions are currently carried out in US dollar. This is the first thing. Therefore, we are really very depending on the international financial networks. Secondly, in addition, most of products and goods are imported. So that's why this situation is very important for us as civil society members, and we are supporting the conclusion of this report. I would like to insist, we will push for the recommendations to be implemented. But unfortunately, the way the DRC banking sector is working as of today is to some extent dangerous for DRC and especially for global financial system. Let me explain, let me give you an example. One of the best, the issue is the central bank himself. The existing banking control system is really weak, but also corrupt and the general, by the general political system. So the compliance system is not appropriate. As an example, the cash withdrawals and deposit limits are officially 10,000 US dollar. This is a way to control the way the cash is moving. But when you see what is happening, banks, and officially banks need to get a special authorization to exceed this requirement. But when you are seeing from today, all banks are not respected, clearly not respected this very important requirement. And unfortunately, even the central bank itself is breaking the rules by making large cash disbursements, as it was the case. I don't know if you follow what happened with the head of cabinet of the president, which is actually at the court. But one of the issues that has been raised is the fact that the central banks withdraw millions of dollars in cash and give them to the last beneficiaries. So in resume, the central bank management himself is really politicized and is one of the issue that we are facing. So I will give you other examples, but let's talk and I will give some other points.
All right, so bro, the ex-banker from the Congo finally said his piece, and really all he's talking about is the bureaucratic bullshit. You know, it was like, oh, no one's holding the banks accountable for being corrupt and not a corruption and blah blah blah, and there need to be better standards in place and better training and blah blah. It's like, fool, you got to look at the bigger picture. I don't know why everybody is just, they can't see the bigger picture. I used to think that everyone thought like me, you know, that when people think about the future, they would consider what practices we have right now are sustainable and which practices aren't. So I took it for granted that we were all headed on the path of peace and away from war, because that was ideal and optimal. But that was me as a child. Of course, you grow up and you realize that no one's thinking about the grand picture, everyone coming together, you know, getting rid of borders or any of that shit. People haven't thought that far, or if they have thought that far, they've convinced themselves that these utopian ideals are evil or bad or just won't work. So it's very disappointing. But yeah, this dude, he's just, you know, he's not getting to the root of the problem. Even though later he will, I've seen this before, and he will admit that the sanctions probably, that they're not gonna fix the problem. He doesn't say that they're outright bad. If anything, he implies that, you know, that the sanctions should be harsher on his own country, because he probably hasn't given it much thought, or who knows, maybe he's paid opposition. I don't know. But I think if he, you know, had thought about it, he'd realize that these sanctions are doing way more damage than the bureaucracy or the lack thereof, or the small time criminals not being held accountable. You need to hold the big time warmongers and the sanctioners accountable. Then the conditions in your country won't be so severe, and people won't be so inclined to commit bank fraud and launder money, etc. Makes sense, doesn't it? Less desperate people running around, less criminals. I know, crazy, right? So counterintuitive, right? You think more desperate people would create a safer and a happier and more prosperous society. But no, it turns out the opposite is true. The more desperate people you have, the more fucking criminals and psychos and crime you have. So, I don't know, shit, crazy thought here. Maybe it behooves you as an individual, no matter who you are, or how sociopathic and psychopathic and narcissistic and selfish you are, maybe it behooves you to help out your fellow man and neighbors in order to help yourself, so that your environment isn't all fucked up and trash and crime ridden. I don't know, crazy thought. Maybe it behooves us all to come together. Or we could just keep on bashing on each other, and bashing on our neighbors, and bashing on, I don't know, fucking Proud Boys, Antifa, the fucking Hicks down south, the MAGA crowd. Hate on them, hate on Black Lives Matter, hate on Russia, hate on China. We could just keep doing that, see how that works out, and just pray to God no one uses a nuke in the end, right? Like, best case scenario in that world, the nukes don't get used for a long time, I guess. I guess that's all we can hope for. In this shit. Getting sick of listening to these fucking warmongers. We'll listen to a little more of these lames. These goddamn super squares. And then we'll end this goddamn nightmare.
And issues.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Let me ask you, I mean, one of the things that we sort of started talking a little bit about in one of our pre-conversations on this event, was we were trying to figure out who is responsible for okaying an account like this? I mean, as an average citizen, I have to say, I don't encounter North Korean individuals very often. If one of them came up to me and said, hey, I'd like to do some business with you, I would probably know myself that's not a good idea. So
Bitch, you racist. That's all I gotta say. Anyway, North Korean, I'm not doing business with you. Isn't your leader like a dictator or something? Jesus Christ, get the fuck out of my face.
is there a person in the Congolese banking system who's supposed to put a stamp on a document to say, yes, you can open an account?
Yeah, of course. The governor of the central bank is the one who is responsible of this situation. But at the same time, let me explain another very important point. We, as country, we have a very big issue in the identifications of people. Let's say it's today difficult, and even not. I can even say I can even say impossible for a bank to be able to truly identify a customer. I don't want to justify what happened, but this is one of the issues that we have. We are probably one of the only country around the world that currently doesn't have any national ID. We don't have any national ID since more than 20 years. So banks are used some other documents generally unreliable, and for which the possibility of verifying the originality is almost not possible. So they can use voter card, certificate of loss, driver license, but all those documents are available on the, let's say, the parallel market to a very ridiculous fees. So this is a very fundamental issue that is actually making the requirement of KYC, know your customer, extremely difficult. And of course, this is also impacting the creation and identification of local businesses, because if you cannot identify persons, so how could you be able to identify the business that are run by person? So the DRC is also one of the, let's say, the few countries where a non-resident can open and hold an account without a rigorous control. So the central bank is the one responsible of this.
Thank you. Let me ask Pierre to jump in on this.
Thank you. I'd like to add a few things to really complement what Floribert is saying. In Congo, you have on paper, you have all the checks and balances, and you have the transparency requirements, and you have institutions. So for example, there's a national cell for financial intelligence. There's an anti-corruption agency. There's all these things. The government sets them up, often under pressure from donors, and then applies itself to essentially neutralize them, either by not funding them or by finding ways to bypass them. And so that's really how Congo functions. You have a formal institutional setup, but you have a very strong shadow mode of governance, which is not always visible. So for example, you would have a bank and there would be, imagine that, I don't know the specifics, but imagine the branch of Afriland in Lubumbashi, where these two gentlemen established their account. The way it would work typically in Congo is that, you have the agency, the branch there's a bunch of people waiting for normal business, and then a big man would come in, somebody with influence. And that person would immediately go to the back room and meet with the branch manager, and then they would work things out. They would hug each other. There would be all sorts of casual conversation, and then he would say, "Listen, I need you to do me a favor, and there's these two people here. We need to open an account." It's not up to the manager to really fight this. This person will have significant connection. It could be the end of the manager's career, and so you will work with this. And this is really the kind of environment. Again, I don't know the specific, but to me it seems very plausible that one would not be at liberty to really enforce regulations in this kind of high-pressure political environment.
Thanks very much, Pierre. I mean, I think one of the major questions that we should really try to get to during this conversation is the question of culpability. Because obviously, this is two North Korean businessmen, but the kind of activities that we're talking about, as you pointed out in your remarks, John, could have a tremendous impact on the willingness of banks to do business in the Congo, on the ability of the Congolese people to exercise their economic freedoms and rights. And so I want to be really clear, that we have to sort of get to the bottom of how this could have happened and have recommendations that are both actionable for policymakers but fair to the Congolese people as well. Pierre, are you aware of any outrage in Congo over this incident? Is it even in Kinshasa? Is it even sort of causing a ripple thus far?
I'm not aware of anything. I was not aware of it until I read the report.
Yeah, no, Shitty wasn't aware of anything until he read the report because there's nothing to report. It's a non-issue. Some North Korean businessmen build a statue in Africa or help finance it or something lame like that. Something mundane and boring and trivial and petty like that. But here we are. And I know this video is like a year old, but I mean, 2020, it's still fresh in my mind. Well, I mean, it'd be 2 years old by now. But I mean, they're still pulling the same crap. Still sanctioning the Congo. Still sanctioning all sorts of countries. Still bombing plenty of countries. This country hasn't changed. Hasn't shown an inkling that it wants to or that it's capable. Not an inkling. I've seen nothing to show that that's capable of any kind of change. Joe Biden got out of Afghanistan. Everybody got out kicking and screaming and bitching and throwing a tantrum like it was the worst thing ever. And now the Taliban have it. Good. That's their home. That's not ours. For better or for worse. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Anyway, I gotta end this soon. Even though it looked like they were just starting to empathize with. Wait, hold on. This whole sanctions things could have serious ramifications. We don't want to fuck over anybody incidentally, like we do every time with sanctions, because that's all that ever happens. Because the leaders are never touched by the sanctions.
I reached out after reading the report in preparation for this meeting. I reached out to colleagues in Lubumbashi with whom I had gone to Kamina, Congolese colleagues with whom I do research, and we kind of tried to reminisce about what we knew, but they were not at all aware of the Korean dimension of the international interest in this. So separate worlds.
So, I mean, I want to shift back to John and to Daria as well. I mean, to try to get a sense of a little bit more context, and we've had some questions in the Q&A function, which I again invite everyone to use, sort of talking about past North Korean activities in the DRC. If Daria or John, if you could jump in, I know the report mentions, it alludes to a couple of incidents involving weapons and police in DRC. And then Daria, if you could let us know, I mean, on the scale of 1 to 10, in terms of things that you've seen and would be concerned about, if you could maybe give us a number about where this ranks, I would appreciate that too.
Yeah, so I think your final point actually touches on a couple of really interesting things that sort of link to the larger conversation that we were having about why should, and there were a couple of questions in the Q&A that I saw about, why should the DRC care about this? Why should we care about this? Aren't there more important cases? How large is this really? And I mean, that's something that's really tricky when it comes to looking at this from a proliferation financing perspective. So that's kind of the angle that I'm coming at it with is, how important is this really to North Korea's weapons of mass destruction program? Again, just coming at it from a proliferation perspective. And that's really, really hard to gauge just because, again, we don't know how much money was made off of this. We don't know where that money is going to go, how much of it is actually going to go into the weapons of mass destruction program. But something that's really important to actually try to tackle is specifically that question is why should we care? So it's the question of what are the consequences of these kinds of sanctions evasion activities? Because, as a couple of people pointed out, I think in the Q&A, There are so many, well, in this discussion, there are so many other challenges that the DRC and that a lot of other countries in the region are facing. So, why should sanctions evasion, proliferation financing, and North Korean statue building really be a concern? And I think answering that question and addressing it effectively and meaningfully is actually a really important exercise, although a challenging one. And I think a few folks have touched on this already, but looking at what impact does this have on the willingness of other countries and other banks to do business with the DRC? What reputational impacts does this have on the DRC economy as a whole? Those are consequences, right? What does this have? What impact does this have on safety, security within the country? So we need to look at consequences for proliferation financing, but also for sanctions evasion in the North Korean sort of context more broadly. From that perspective, that the consequences are kind of a lot larger than just contributing to the weapons of mass destruction program. And then the other point that I wanted to make is that this story we hear a lot of times in a lot of different countries. The fact that the regulation is there on paper, but it's not very effective. And that's why, when the Financial Action Task Force looks at countries and their effectiveness and their ability to implement UN sanctions, they look at, okay, is the regulation there, but also is it being implemented effectively? So it's a double-sided coin. You need to look at the regulation, the letter of the law, but also the political will, whether it's there or not. And the fact that the political will is not there to implement sanctions, or the regulation or the capability in government or the private sector is not there to implement sanctions, actually indicates a much larger problem that, again, a lot of people have touched upon. So whenever we see gaps in proliferation financing or sanctions evasion measures, they point to other gaps, like difficulty in recognizing ultimate beneficial owners, like Floribert mentioned, which again has implications for corruption, for terrorist financing, potentially for money laundering. So you really need to look at this small case, seemingly a relatively small case of these two smaller statues. You need to look at it in this larger, more holistic context. What does this actually mean for the health of the DRC economy, for their ability to counter other forms of financial crime?
Fantastic, Daria. Thank you very much. We're getting a number of questions in the Q&A about the from various people about the ability of the Congolese government to collaborate with the UN on these sanctions and enforcing these sanctions. And former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Hank Cohen actually asked, South Korea has an embassy in Kinshasa. Can't they help?
So, I mean, that was just fascinating, dude. Just hearing them go on and on and on about how they wish they could think of an excuse to be spying and making sensationalizing this anti-story. They have nothing. They have nothing on North Korea or the DRC. Not really. But regardless, here we are, right? Sorry, I started playing chess here.
A little bit to try to identify some of these North Korean activities. Pierre, John, Daria, and Floribert especially, I mean, is there collaboration among these various Congolese entities, or is everyone sort of asleep at the switch? And anyone can jump in. It's not very helpful for me to moderate and sort of say everyone, so I will point someone out if need be.
I'll let someone else speak on whether the Congolese authorities are cooperating or not, but it does bring up the interesting point that it's great that there is a financial intelligence unit and an anti-corruption agency and 15 other agencies that look at financial crime. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about sanctions evasion specifically, which one of them, where's the buck stop? Which one of them is actually responsible for regulating the private sector for enforcing sanctions, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times that can actually be to the detriment of counter-proliferation financing or sanctions evasion when you kind of have too many cooks in the kitchen. So it's not a matter of kind of quantity, but more of quality, I guess, or identifying who's actually responsible for keeping track of all of this and being accountable for all of this.
Florida, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. Yes, I'm not sure because let me say that the Congolese authorities are part of the problem. I can even say that they are main problem. And because when you see the people involved in this kind of transactions, you can see authorities or network of authorities involved in this kind of transaction. I think even in the report you can see that Ramazan Shadari, who was the candidate of Kabila, is one of the person seems to be involved, and others. So as of today, I'm not sure that they will be able to collaborate. Maybe the new president could be open for this kind of collaboration, but I'm not sure. I would like also to react quickly. I think it's important. One of the points raised by Mr. Engelberg regarding the fact that we have all the competencies and rules, and the problem is just let's say the system. I can say yes, 80% of the problem is the system. But I think we also have some technical issues in the banks themselves. When you see in most of banks, DRC, anti-money laundering systems and monitoring of the accounts, let's say of, for example, political figures, are clearly not existent. This is an issue. The alert and monitoring tools are very, very weak. I've spent 10 years in two banks, 4 years as a risk manager, and I can tell you that it's weak. And in most cases, it's manual. So there is currently no centralized database that can be accessed for everybody. So how do you want a bank to be?
Okay, I'm starving. All right, I gotta go. That was something else. These warmongers. I don't know. I don't know how they rationalize that shit. Anyway, I'm fucking tired. I just had insomnia. I wanted to test on my new laptop. Stream. I haven't done that in a long time. So that was fun. Got some chess in. Got my ass whipped and even kicked a little ass. So, I mean, this is usually when streamers tell you to like and subscribe and all that bullshit, but I ain't gonna do that because I don't give a shit. So, bye. Bye.